Подожди, мы еще не дома.
Пункт управления.
On August 24, 1981, newlyweds Larisa and Vladimir Savitsky board an Antonov An-24 RV aircraft. They travel from Komsomolsk-on-Amur to Blagoveshchensk following their honeymoon. Larisa is a student with specific plans for her future. Inside the cabin, Larisa sits next to Vladimir. She exhibits a specific physical habit. She does not fasten her seatbelt. She has a phobia of the restraint and refuses to click the buckle. Larisa leans her head against Vladimir's shoulder. She closes her eyes as the flight begins. The weather outside the windows is clear. She falls asleep in this position. The plane reaches an altitude of 5 kilometers. Suddenly, the airframe shakes. Larisa wakes instantly. She looks out the window and sees a Soviet Air Force bomber jet in close proximity. The two aircraft collide mid-air. The impact divides the passenger plane into two sections. One engine is destroyed. Fire erupts from the wreckage as the fuselage disintegrates. Cabin pressure drops. Objects and people pull toward the open air. A flight attendant is swept away by the vacuum. Because Larisa is not wearing her seatbelt, she is lifted from her seat. She flails her arms and legs in the air. Her hands strike surfaces as she tries to find a grip. She reaches out and grasps the edge of a seat in the broken section of the plane. Her fingers tighten around the material. Larisa looks toward the front of the aircraft where Vladimir is located. She attempts to move toward him. A blast occurs at the rear of the plane. The tail section breaks away and falls toward the ground. The section containing Larisa remains in the air, descending. Air pressure pulls at her body. She is thrown forward toward the cockpit area. Vladimir reaches out his arm. Their hands meet for a few seconds. Vladimir grips her fingers. The force of the wind is high. Their hands slide apart. The front section of the plane falls away. Larisa remains in a fragment of the fuselage that drifts downward. She ignores the prospect of death and thinks of her husband. She pulls herself into a seat. She pulls the seatbelt across her waist and locks it. She loses consciousness during the final descent.
Мне нравится.
Я в дамскую комнату. Обещаю.
Larisa regains consciousness in the middle of the Siberian taiga. Her seat remains upright amidst the foliage of the crash site. She sits motionless for several seconds. The fuselage is shattered, with metal debris scattered across the forest floor away from her position. Memory of the collision returns. As she shifts her weight, a sensation radiates from her leg. She looks down and observes a large iron rod protruding from her limb. The metal punctures the muscle. Larisa reaches down with both hands and grips the metal. She pulls the rod out of her flesh in one motion. Her voice echoes through the trees. Blood flows from the open wound. She reaches for her skirt and grips the fabric. She tears a strip of material from the hem. She wraps the cloth around the puncture site to create a makeshift bandage, though the blood soaks through the fabric. She attempts to stand, but her leg collapses. She remains on the ground, scanning the trees for a rescue party. She projects her voice into the forest, calling for help, but hears only the sound of the wind. A movement in the shadows catches her eye. She drags herself toward a dark shape nearby. She reaches out and touches the shoulder of a young girl lying face down. The body is cold. Larisa realizes the girl is dead. Larissa's breathing becomes shallow. Her vision blurs and she loses consciousness again on the forest floor. In a different location, a Russian official receives a report regarding the disappearance of 2 aircraft. A rescue operation initiates. Helicopters prepare for departure to search the coordinates of the taiga. Larisa wakes due to the sensation of mosquitoes biting her skin. A rhythmic thumping sound grows louder in the sky. She identifies the noise as the rotor blades of a helicopter. She realizes the rescue team is in the area. She looks at the deceased woman nearby and notices a scarf. She unties the fabric and removes it. She adds this scarf to her leg wound to increase the pressure of the bandage. She uses a tree trunk to pull herself to a standing position. She limps in the direction of the engine noise. She enters a clearing where the trees thin into a field. The helicopter appears above the tree line. Larisa raises the scarf and waves it over her head. She watches the aircraft, but its path does not change. The pilots do not see her. The helicopter moves away until the sound fades.
Нашел! Ребят, фуражку нашел!
Где-то здесь она была. Может, сядем на нее?
Здесь? Тогда
Larisa maintains her footing. She looks at the ground and sees a small teddy bear lying in the dirt. She picks up the toy. She searches the fabric and discovers a metal pin. She remembers a technique taught by Vladimir during a camping trip. Larisa takes the pin and rubs it against her clothing to create a static charge. She finds a leaf and places it on the surface of a puddle. She sets the magnetized pin on the leaf. The leaf rotates until the pin points in a specific direction. Following this compass, Larisa moves through the brush. Her movements are slow due to the pain in her leg. She reaches the bank of a river. She kneels and cups the water in her hands, drinking. She splashes water onto her face to remove grime and blood. She finds a plastic bag near the riverbank. She submerges the bag, filling it, and seals it. Larisa returns to the site of the crash to gather supplies. She locates a coat belonging to a deceased passenger and pulls it over her shoulders. She finds a wooden branch on the ground. She tests its strength by leaning against it. She uses the strip of cloth from her skirt to tie the water bag to the top of the stick. Using the branch as a crutch, she walks away from the wreckage. After several hours, she reaches the edge of the forest. The trees give way to an open field. She steps forward, but the ground is not solid. It is a maze of mud. Her injured leg sinks into the mire. Larisa struggles to pull her limb free, but the suction increases. She reaches out and claws at the slippery grass. She spots a tree branch extending over the mud. She stretches her arm and wraps her fingers around the wood. She pulls her weight forward, inching out of the mud until she reaches solid ground. She collapses onto the grass. Her eyes close and she falls asleep. When she wakes, the light has changed. She stands and looks toward a mountain. She decides to climb toward the peak, hoping the elevation makes her visible. Larisa begins her ascent. She moves with difficulty as the wounds on her feet cause her to stumble. She grips rocks and uneven terrain to pull herself upward. Upon reaching the summit, her legs lose stability. She collapses and falls back down the incline. She remains on the ground. She visualizes her past experiences with Vladimir. She recalls their honeymoon and their plans. These thoughts cause her to stand. She climbs the mountain again and reaches the peak.
Тушка прямо в точку.
Грузовой засвет. Сообщи, начали подъем.
A light illuminates the area. Larisa pauses, but she observes a tigress nearby. The animal hunts for prey. Larisa remains still, but the tigress turns and sees her. The predator runs toward Larisa. Larisa turns and flees. Her leg injury prevents high speed, while the tigress gains ground. The distance closes. Larisa sees a pit in the ground ahead. She stumbles and falls into the hole. The tigress stops at the edge and moves away. Larisa climbs out of the pit and continues toward the opposite side of the mountain. From the edge of a cliff, she looks down and identifies a section of the wreckage. She recognizes the part of the plane where Vladimir was seated. She descends the mountain toward the site. She reaches the base and enters the river water. The current is strong. As the water gets deeper, the flow sweeps her off her feet. The low temperature causes her limbs to feel numb. She reaches out and grabs a stone in the river. She holds onto the rock, breathing heavily. She swims toward the bank and reaches a shallow puddle. She sees a body nearby. It is the pilot. Larisa searches the area near the pilot and finds an emergency flare gun. The device contains 2 bullets. She points the gun at the sky and fires the first flare. She waits, but there is no response. She keeps the second bullet. As she moves forward, her foot strikes an object. She sees Vladimir's bag. Inside are the sketches he created for her. Larisa searches the nearby wreckage. She finds Vladimir sitting inside a portion of the plane. She rushes to him and wraps her arms around him. She takes out her wedding ring and places it on his finger. They lie down and fall asleep. Larisa wakes. She realizes the interaction was a dream. Vladimir's body is next to her, but he is deceased. Larisa screams into the forest. She remains by the body. A helicopter approaches the river. Larisa takes the flare gun and fires the final bullet. Her body becomes paralyzed from exhaustion. A rescue officer sees the signal. The aircraft lands and the officer approaches Larisa. He removes his jacket to cover her. Larisa is the only survivor found from the crash. The events are based on a real incident from 1981 where one woman survived a 5-kilometer fall in the Siberian taiga.
Не получилось, потому что я вышла замуж. Вернемся, мужчины. Потом говорит,